Hello and welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I'm Catherine Camp, your hostess for the show. And this is where we dig in deeply into difficult conversations in our culture. And we do this so that we can have conversations that count, conversations with an eternal perspective. Today I have something completely different for you. I know I say that a lot, but today we're going to be talking about communism. And we're going to focus on a dance troupe, Shen Yun. So who is Shen Yun? Shen Yun is a colorful pageantry production of China's rich heritage before communism. So why are we talking about communist China on the Faith and Culture Show? Many of you noticed that life became very uncomfortable, especially during, beginning 2020 and up until about January of 2025. Conservative Christians and truth tellers who want nothing more than to live clean, God-honoring lives and to recognize our liberties as written out in our foundational documents were silenced and threatened. Many of us were banned and censored. Others were murdered or completely discredited. For those of us who are in tune with the book of Revelation, found in the New Testament portion of the Judeo-Christian Bible, we could clearly see the principles and the parallels of what was happening in the culture around us and the scriptures. The reality is that this world will end eventually, according to the Bible. And for those who are born again, we are tasked with noticing the signs. That is what makes knowing God above all else so important. Those of us who are awake to the reality around us are charged with making disciples of those who God puts in our path. Jesus was clear that there would be great deception in the last days. And if you've read any of my Substacks, you would know this. The deception would be so great and stressful that many will either cave to pressure or they will be deceived so fully that they will end up taking the mark of the beast, which will, as scripture says, disqualify them from eternity with the Father. This is what the Chinese underground church faces every day. There's no room for God in a socialist, a Marxist, or a communist dictatorship. So what about Shen Yun? How do they fit into all of this? Well, their production shows such beauty and creativity that it is a wonderful example of how God's image bearers are capable of creating stunning expressions when given the liberty to do so. But when there is oppression, there is fear and forced mechanical behaviors. Today, we will be speaking with Leeshai Lemish. Leeshai Lemish has been the MC for the Shen Yun production since its inception in 2006. He's going to talk to us about the long tentacles of the Chinese Communist Party that never allow for the Chinese people to be truly free, no matter where they are in the world. As Christians, we cannot just sit back and allow this type of tyrannical rule to dictate human lives, no matter where they are from. Leeshai earned his bachelor degree in Chinese history and language from Pomona College and his master's in international relations from the London School of Economics. He has emceed nearly 2,000 Shen Yun performances at prestigious theaters around the world. Leeshai has tracked over 100 cases of the Chinese Communist Party and its agents trying to sabotage Shen Yun internationally through bullying techniques and threats to their lives, and the bomb threats of the organizations and beautiful theaters around the world where this wonderful production takes place. So I want to welcome to the Faith and Culture Show, Leeshai Lemish. Welcome, Leeshai. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for that intro. I love your opening. It's so animated and exciting.
Thank you. There's a lot going on. And this whole show is about waking Christians up and getting them out of the pews and actually active in our culture. And when I saw your name on the list sent to me, I thought, wow, Shen Yun is such a beautiful production. And, there's a Chinese Baptist church not far from me. And the pastor is so scared that he would never allow me to interview him. And what a shame. Thousands of miles away from China. And he just would rather remain under the radar. And that always struck me. I was like, what is that all about? So first, I just kind of want to know, how did you get involved? Obviously, your background set you up for this, emceeing, and then you've been in it for a long time. So just how does someone like you get involved with a beautiful production like this?
Yeah, it was definitely not something I was expecting. It's not something that I wrote in my third grade essay, what I'm going to be when I grow up, as an MC in a bilingual role on stage. I dreamt of being a baseball player. And that's what I did growing up. I was a pitcher. And as I got more advanced in my playing career and really getting serious and getting looked at by scouts, I learned that the mental side of the game is really what separates the top performers in any sport. But this was in the 90s. Right now, mental performance coaches are plentiful, and even college programs they have them. But back then, there was nothing about mental training, the mental side of the game. Was it? Yeah, was it Yogi Berra said baseball is 90% mental, the other half is physical.
Well, I tell you, yeah. And I was a gymnast, and it was like that. And I noticed it. We would always try to psych each other out. In fact, I walked around talking gibberish to make the other girls think I was Russian. And we were very afraid because the Russian girls were really good.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's just a silly
interesting.
side note.
that is a strategy for sure. So for me as a pitcher, I really got interested in meditation and in guided imagery and visualization and convincing yourself of a certain outcome and how to stay focused and block out all this stuff. And that led me towards an interest in Chinese meditation practices and in Chinese philosophy. I mean, I started over with yoga and moved over to Tai Chi and eventually found Falun Gong, which is a meditation discipline that's unfortunately and tragically being persecuted in China. And that is what got me into this world of Chinese language and culture. And then I started college right after that, after my baseball career. Shockingly, did not lead me to Major League Baseball right away. I went into this field of study, and again, never dreamt that I would be an MC. I was interested in human rights in China, specifically in how people who practice Falun Gong were being rounded up and sent to labor camps and concentration camps, and later being killed for their organs. And of course, they're not the only group. They're perhaps the largest persecuted religious group in the world right now. But we know about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and House Christians. I don't know if you've talked to people about this on your show, but of course, that's a big issue. It's been a big issue for a while. People being arrested for having a Bible, not the Chinese Communist Party edited version of the Bible, but an actual one. And so I was really interested in this element. And I was looking at whether some of these things constituted genocide. I was looking at torture. I was looking at the history of the Chinese Communist Party from Mao to today. And then around 2005, there was an early version of this Shen Yun production. It wasn't called Shen Yun yet, but it was some of the same people involved. And they said, can you come MC it? And, you can speak some Chinese on stage. It'll be fun. And I said at the time, no. I said, people are being rounded up and tortured and killed in China. This is not some time for a song and dance production. This is not appealing to me at all. I want to focus on the human cost of all of this. And said, no, it'll be good. You'll see art is actually very powerful. And I did this show. It was in LA at the time. And it was a lot of fun. I cracked some jokes in Chinese. It was mostly Chinese people in the audience at the time. It was for the Dragon Boat Festival, which is coming up. It's in May usually. And then the next year I was in London, as you mentioned, doing my master's degree. And they had a larger production for the Chinese New Year. And part of the reason for that was the people who put this on, they said, the Chinese embassy and consulates, they have their own show, but it does not represent us. It's all this red propaganda, how great things are under communism, how wonderful Mao was, how China's better than ever before. This is not what we Chinese people believe, they said. let's put on our own show and celebrate real traditional culture. And they asked me to come MC that. So I flew back from London. This was at Radio City Music Hall, and 7,000 people in the auditorium, and this huge 5-ton curtain, and just cameras everywhere. It was really exciting. And it wasn't Shen Yun yet, but again, some of the same ideas. And later that year, when Shen Yun was created, I was asked to try out, and I got the gig. And here we are now, 19 years later, 2,000 shows later, traveling around the world. And then kind of bring it back to your initial question, what I started noticing was how the Chinese Communist Party was following us wherever we went, sometimes quite literally, but often symbolically. And we would have theaters would get pressure to try to cancel our contracts from Chinese ambassadors, consul generals, visiting them, writing them, calling them, knocking on doors, trying to get the local governments like the mayors to pressure them, or to foreign ministers in other countries to try to pressure the theaters to cancel our shows. Usually without success for the most part, a couple of exceptions. We saw them trying to compete with us by sending performing arts troops to play across the street. And on a couple of occasions, we had to reschedule and move to another date. Then they canceled theirs and moved theirs to the same date as well to try to compete. And this confused a few people. We would get to a certain city. I remember in Netherlands at The Hague, we got there, and people said, "Oh, we just saw your show." We said, "That's impossible. We just got here." And people were confused about what show they were watching. But that really failed after a while too. And then we saw all these tactics. As you mentioned, I think when the beginning of the tour started, I had over 100 cases. I now have 158, just this tour alone, having added, 50 something cases to the list because of all the bomb threats that we're getting, and tire slashing and all this stuff. And that's been going on. And so I've been trying to document it. And then this year, because of all the incidents, including at the Kennedy Center, which I'm happy to talk about, it's gotten a lot of media attention. And so we're talking quite a lot about this, because there's also a lot of attention in the US government in the last, I would say, 3 administrations about this idea of transnational repression, which is really an export of persecution to other countries, an export of repression. And the CCP is the expert at this. They're the number one regime that's doing this. It's not that other countries are not, but the CCP is doing it on such a scale. And they're doing it in a way that makes other governments and institutions complicit. And really what they're trying to do is use our own loopholes, so to speak, of our own freedoms, our legal system, our free press, our freedom of expression against us. They won't allow us to do anything like that in China. In fact, Shen Yun can't perform in China. And we can't write opinion pieces in Chinese newspapers like the Chinese ambassadors can in the US. Anyway, that's a short, long answer to your question that brings us back to what we're facing right now.
That's, I don't think the average American understands how serious this is, because we take our freedoms for granted here. And we've seen a lot of that for, I guess, the last decade, and it goes back even further. But for most people, they started to wake up about a decade ago to what's going on here. And if you look at China, and a lot of people say a lot of what's happened here, it's from Chinese push, and they need complicit and compliant politicians to get their dirty deeds done here. We know that a lot of the human trafficking ends up in organ harvesting, like you say, of these children. Is that all true? I mean, do you know anything about that?
There's so many issues with China and the Chinese Communist Party. And I think before I list all of the ones that I think are at the front, I think the main thing that Shen Yun does, and that what my friends who are Chinese dissidents or activists, what they try to do, is really separate the concept of China and the Chinese Communist Party. It's really easy and tempting to say China does this or Beijing is doing that.
Yes.
But really, it's the Chinese Communist Party, which has latched on to this civilization that has such a glorious history of 5,000 years plus even. And it's taken it over. It's really what Chinese people more and more are realizing is that this is like a parasite. It is a foreign import. It came in very deliberately by the international communist movement. It's a Soviet import or export, depending what side you're on. It was brought into China in the aftermath of World War II, when the Chinese government, the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek, who eventually fled to Taiwan, was exhausted from fighting the Japanese in World War II. And they had to fight the Japanese and the Communist Party guerrilla at the same time. And the Communist Party then defeated them and said, look, we liberated China from oppression and from the Japanese, when in fact, China defeated the Japanese in spite of the Chinese Communist Party, not thanks to them. And then they took over, and the first thing they set out to do was destroy their own culture, the heritage of 5,000 years of civilization. Mao brought in a famine that killed, we don't know exactly how many, but the range is between 30 to 45 million people through a man-made famine during the Great Leap Forward. And then the Cultural Revolution killed millions more. We still don't know exactly how many. Estimates vary quite a lot. But what we do know is they burned artwork, razed temples to the ground, destroyed artifacts, smashed statues of Confucius, called him the number one bastard, and made monks and nuns marry each other, took them out of their religious practices, and really cut off an entire generation from their heritage. And primarily what they tried to instill in people is this concept that it's communist Marxist at its most distilled form, which is this utilitarianism, materialism. All you have is what's in front of you right now, this life and this material world, and trying to have a good, comfortable life. Don't worry about anything beyond that. Afterlife, reincarnation, heaven and hell, none of that exists. None of this is true. It's only what's in front of you. Make money, be happy, leave. Don't get involved in government. Don't want anything like freedom or religion. Don't want that. Just want to have a good meal and a nice apartment. And well, that's the kind of compact that they made with the Chinese people, with those who are willing. And of course, this goes against thousands of years of Chinese civilization, and I would say human civilization anywhere in the world, certainly in monotheistic traditions, but also in the Asian context, where you have to be accountable to your ancestors, you have to be accountable to the divine in the afterlife, and what you do here really matters. And that's when you look at the heroes of Chinese history, the legends and the stories from literature that we celebrate in Shen Yun. They're all about making the moral choice in the face of adversity, of doing what's right, not what's convenient. And that's completely antithetical to what the Chinese Communist Party wants Chinese people to do. And so that's why you have now this conflation that the Chinese Communist Party wants you to think that if you're going to complain, if you can even ask, hey, where did this pandemic come from? What was your role in that, and spreading it to the whole world? What about fentanyl? What's your role in that? What about stealing military secrets and sending us cheap products and all these other issues? And are you spying on us in our pockets or our phones? All these other questions, they will say you're racist, you're anti-Chinese. And even if Chinese people raise these questions, they'll say you're anti-China, when in fact you're just asking legitimate questions about this tyrannical regime, the world's largest dictatorship in human history. So organ harvesting certainly is a major issue. People are calling it the crime of the century. I first heard about this in 2006, when there were a couple of people who came out of China, and they claimed to be witnesses to organ harvesting in a place called Sujiatun, outside of the city of Shenyang in northeastern China. And they said that there was a concentration camp, and people who practiced Falun Gong, who were incarcerated at the time, and they were healthy because they practiced meditation, they didn't drink, they didn't smoke. But there were too many of them in prison, and the Communist Party didn't know what to do with them. They found a way to have a win-win situation and basically create a database of these prisoners based on their blood type and their tissue type, and then have them be a stable of on-demand organs. And we're not talking about cornea and kidneys, which of course would be horrible enough. We're talking about livers and hearts, as well as the corneas and the kidneys. And so over the years after that, we started getting a lot more information. There were more people who came forward. And in fact, in my early days with Shen Yun, our schedule is such that we perform about 4 or 5 months out of the year. Then we come back and we get ready for a new show for the next year. We have a whole new show. And so I still was able to maintain a little bit of my interest in human rights. By when we come back from tour, I would then go and I would actually do a little bit of research into these issues. And in 2007, 2008, 2009, I worked with a man named Ethan Gutman on a book about the persecution of Falun Gong. And at the time, he actually, when we first started looking into this, he didn't believe that the organ harvesting story was true. There was still not a lot of information. There were a couple of people from Canada, the two Davids, we call them, David Kilgore and David Matus, who wrote a book called Bloody Harvest about this. But there was not that much information. And we went out to Thailand and to Taiwan and Hong Kong back when we still could. And we interviewed people who just came out of labor camps in China. And especially in Bangkok, we found quite a few of these. And they would flee China through Yunnan province in southwest China, and then on the back of a motorcycle to Burma. And then if they survived everything in Burma, they would take a boat to Thailand and eventually try to get asylum status with the United Nations there and get relocated to another country. And that's where we found them. And they were usually just a few weeks or a couple of months away from the labor camps. And some of them still had scars that were healing on their body from the torture they experienced. And we said to them, because we'd interviewed over 100 people at that point, we were talking to them. We knew the whole story. We said, listen, when you were imprisoned, did you have blood samples taken? Did you have urine samples? And they said, what are you talking about? We were being tortured regularly. They didn't care about our health. We said, we know they're not for your health, but did you have them? They said, yeah, we had blood samples. We had a lot of blood removed. We had tissue. We had eye exams. We had urine samples. And then we said, okay, what about the other inmates, the drug dealers, the prostitutes, the murderers? What about them? They said, no, they never got these physicals. I said, and then we started asking, did people disappear? Yeah, they said sometimes in the middle of the night, there would be these vans that would come and these people would disappear. And that's how we started really learning about this practice that they had of really getting a database on all these people. And then when they needed them for a rich official or for sadly Americans or people from other countries who were desperate for an organ, they would go and they would find the person. They made a lot of money off of this. And this is a practice that we still don't know exactly what the scale was. There was a tribunal about this with very prominent individuals done in London, the London Tribunal. People can look it up. And there are congressional hearings about this. And they put the number as somewhere between 60 to 90,000 organs a year. And
Wow.
at the time when we started talking about this, 2007, 8, 9, 10, we said, if this isn't stopped, of course, it's horrible already to the people who've experienced it and their families, but it's also going to expand to other groups. And sure enough, a few years later, when the Uyghurs were rounded up, all the young men started disappearing. Certainly the people who were in a particular age group where the organs are considered most healthy, they disappeared. Actually, Ethan Gutman is writing about that right now as well. So this has been an ongoing story. And we don't really know at this point how many of these organs that people went to China for. Transplant tourism is what it's called. I spoke with a man. I mean, this is not really quite on our topic of Shen Yun, and I'm happy.
I know. I didn't expect to even ask that. It just came out of nowhere. Sorry.
Well, it was a good question, and it opened a floodgate. But it's important and horrifying issue. Ethan's book is called The Slaughter, and I start off by saying how he did not really believe this was true to begin with, but he became one of the world's experts on it after he encountered firsthand what these people had been through. He's got a huge chapter about this in his book. But as part of that research, when I was in Israel, I interviewed a man who was a broker, and he arranged for 13 heart transplants in China, not knowing where the organs were coming from. But what he knew was they had organs that were available, and they promised him within a week or two. And anybody who has had to face the horrible experience of waiting for an organ through the systems that we have in the West knows that you're not going to get a heart in a week or two just because you said that you want one. But in China, you can. And this man was eventually caught by the Israeli government for tax evasion. Wow. But when I interviewed him, when we got all this information, I actually spoke with one of the patients who got the heart transplant. It was evident that the organs were ready for whenever they needed them. They would go, they would put them up in a fancy hotel and their families as well, and then schedule the operation date long in advance. And what we learned is that these people who were prisoners of conscience, they never committed any crime. They were not death row inmates, as the CCP had tried to claim for many years, that these were coming from death row inmates. And of course, that raises many moral questions as well. But they were basically scheduled in advance, and they were executed via the organ removal. They were still alive, anesthetized when the organs were removed, and that kept them fresh. And we don't know how many people to this point have been murdered that way. In our Shen Yun performance, we have a dance that, in a very gentle and suitable for stage way, hints at some of this. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that dance, about the brutality of the persecution in China, is it's actually got a message of hope in it. And that is one of the stories that our audience members find the most inspiring, because they see the horrible reality that these people, millions of people in China, have to face, but then they see the courage that's really faith driven. The idea that they believe in doing what's right. They believe in standing up for their rights. They believe in this idea that there are greater powers at play. And they have a redemption in the story. And they see this connection between the human and the divine. And it's inspiring. You have a lot of Christians from many different denominations speaking about how inspired they are in their own faith and their own belief system by seeing this performance that did not mention Christianity whatsoever. And because it's something so deep and so universal that really connects with people.
Yeah, when you respect human dignity, you will get people with a conscience. What I noticed, what you said is, it's as if the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, the whole intent, and it's Marxism, like you say, it's Marxism, communism. They want to wipe out the previous culture.
Yeah.
And so when we see here in the United States groups that are being paid by someone, and many of us know who those someones are, and they start tearing down statues and condemning all the culture, whether it's something that is embarrassing as far as that individual and has a statue. We need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly, how we got to where we are today. But when they try to start erasing the culture, so I guess Shen Yun poses a big threat to the CCP, because people will begin to see that China hasn't always been attached to the Communist Party. That's that there was beauty and culture, and like you say, there was human dignity and close family ties. And I have heard, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, because I never studied Chinese culture before, that when they start rounding people up, and you say this, they get prisoners of conscience. In other words, people who just think against the CCP, who speak
or just
up
have their own belief
it.
system, even if they didn't go against the regime. Just they have their own belief. They're devout Christians. They're Falun Gong practitioners. They're Tibetan Buddhists. They don't even have to be political that way. But yes,
they just
when
have
they're
to believe the government's not
different.
God, right?
Exactly, basically.
Oh, wow. So the first people that they start knocking off are the older generation, so that they will not be around to tell the stories of their ancestors. Is that true?
There's definitely part of that. And when Mao really tried to revise Chinese culture and turn it into what my Chinese friends called party culture, they call it Chinese Communist Party culture. And they even will talk about this when they describe other Chinese people. So these are Chinese, let's say, who are American citizens, have been here for a while, naturalized. And when they see Chinese people coming from China, they will say, oh, I can't work with that person. He's got too much party culture. And what they mean by that is they've been, to use the term that they use, brainwashed to the point that their whole worldview is so filtered through what they've been taught is right and wrong through the Chinese Communist Party education system, that it's very, very hard to work with them as human beings do. And when you have to have trust, you have to have respect people's dignity and obviously personal space. And that's where they feel embarrassed as Chinese people when they see how these other Chinese people who come straight out of China behave, because they say this is not our culture. Our culture was one of a tremendous amount of respect for other people's dignity and giving them their space and respecting their individualism. It's not about just trying to beat people down to the ground, and everything is very, very extreme. Yeah, absolutely. Getting rid of the elder generation and their education system. In the Cultural Revolution, for example, one of the main methods that they used was having children turn in their parents. They would have these struggle sessions, they call them, of publicly criticizing them, putting dunce caps on them, beating them up, students against their teachers, kids against their parents, their grandparents. Very, very common. I know people who lived through it. They've described it to me. They've saw people's heads being smashed like watermelons on the street. It's absolutely horrific. And these are people who are, in their 50s and 60s now. This is not something that happened all that long ago. They lived through it. And to get back to your earlier point about American society, when some of these people saw what was happening, especially a few years ago, they said, this reminds me of what I saw in the Cultural Revolution in China, especially when they see statues being smashed, and the kind of thought police, this Orwellian thought police of what you're allowed to think, and a crime of speech, of saying the wrong word or calling something the wrong way and not being politically correct. They said this is exactly what we went through in China. Fortunately, it hasn't gotten to that level of what they experienced during the Cultural Revolution, but it reminded them. And so when you say the Chinese Communist Party is a fate, I think anybody who is it's that whole universe of this attempt to wipe out what is traditional and what is good and what is shared about humanity, and replace it with a culture that is about struggle and vilification and fighting against each other and divide and conquer and pitting us against each other into smaller and smaller groups, where eventually, no matter what your identity is, you're going to be wrong one way or another in some way. And that is very much in common. And in fact, if your viewers are familiar with this, they might know of the movie called Agenda. And if not, I would highly recommend watching it. It talks about the idea of what the communist movement was trying to do and the long game that they play. And they laid this out decades ago in the 50s with a playbook of what they're going to do to Western society and how they're going to take it over. And the Chinese Communist Party, they're masters at this. They're not in a rush. They don't care if things don't succeed the next couple of years. They have a 50-year plan and a 100-year plan to take over the world, literally take over the world and restore China under the Communist Party's banner as a world power, the world power, and have the entire world at its feet. And they're not in a rush in terms of how. So they can go and they can support a fentanyl industry that will slowly and tragically ruin the American youth. And they can go and they can try to bribe people to stop other voices like Shen Yun from coming out, and set honey traps for our officials, and try to censor the media and do all these different things that they do and infiltrate. And we're learning slowly now the degree of infiltration that we have in America by Chinese operatives and people who've been bought by them. And I would say that in the movie Agenda, they actually, if you look at some of these books that they cite there, and the experts, they talk about step by step what they're going to do, and this whole divide and conquer and weaken people's faith in divine powers or in a moral system whatsoever is a key component of that. And the education system just goes on and on and on. But the antidote to that, we believe, and which is what really drives our performers, because our performers work very hard. It's not easy to be. It's maybe easy to go and talk about it like I do, but it's not easy for these principal dancers who are really the best in the world at what they do. And if you see classical Chinese dance, it's incredibly athletic and very, very expressive. And they're flipping and they're doing all these amazing flexibility maneuvers. And then they quickly get off stage and they get into a different costume and they're a whole other character and telling a whole other story. They're the Monkey King one moment, and then they're a heroic general another. But this is what really drives them, is this idea that through performing arts, you can really help make the world a better place and bring hope to people where it's needed, and shine a light in darkness, and bring freedom to China. And this is what drives them. And that is why, even as we get the bomb threats and the tire slashings and all the sweat that they have to go through to do what they do, they're motivated and driven and have a smile on their face, because I think they find a lot of joy in this sense of purpose.
Well, that's what it seems that the Communist Party does, is it strips you of purpose. You get a job, like you said, make money, just be happy with that. It reminds me a lot of what the World Economic Forum was saying. You will have nothing and you will be happy by 2030. In other words, you'll just be a renter and you will own nothing. And I know that was it Xi Jinping who put Tedros in his position at the World Health Organization? Do you know?
I'm not sure exactly how it came about, but I know a lot of these organizations were definitely controlled one step at a time by the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of the international organizations, that goes back to, for example, why we even call COVID. That was a term that the CCP wanted us to use. They didn't want us to. People were calling it the Wuhan virus at the time, the China virus, and they were getting deplatformed, right? Yeah. And now the CIA and and other world investigators and world leaders are very clear that the most likely scenario was a lab leak, and that they know that the CCP, while they shut down Wuhan entirely, they put people from Wuhan on planes to go all over the world. They said, okay, if this is going to suck for us, it's going to suck for everybody. And they spread the virus very, very fast around the world. And so we know that they had a tremendous hand, even if you accept you're not sure exactly how it came about, but in spreading it everywhere and exporting their practices that we now know were very problematic. And then we still call it COVID. And that just shows how subliminally we've bought into their propaganda, let alone their control of these international institutions that then told us what to do. And we had no choice but to believe them.
Yeah. Well, that's awful. And I'm glad we're here talking about this, and really grateful for Shen Yun. I know it's hard, even just being a dancer, it's very difficult. And especially you said they perform 4 to 5 months out of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and the rest of the time is practice.
Yeah. So what we do is, it's interesting, and there's been some misunderstanding of these performers in media, and I think this media has an agenda of its own, and why we're seeing some critique. And I think hopefully someday we'll find out exactly how this came about. But what happens is, so classical Chinese dance is a young person's game. It's very athletic. As a former gymnast, you will know the golden age for performers, Olympic gymnasts, especially females, is going to be around 18, 19, right? That's like where most of the gold medalists are going to be. They're a little older now, but traditionally that was more the age. And the same is with classical Chinese dance. You have to have that flexibility, that explosiveness, and the ability to jump and run around for such a long time. And so with Shen Yun, we also have these schools that are independent, but they're religious schools. One of them is called Feitian Academy of the Arts. The other is called Feitian College. They're based in New York. They're certified by the New York Board of Education and by the New England Board of Education in the college case. And these schools, what they do is they allow the talented artists, not just dancers, but also musicians, to be in a practicum program that allows them to then perform with Shen Yun Performing Arts as part of their education, as part of their accreditation and graduation. And so they get to travel the world, they get to perform, all their expenses are covered, they're on full scholarships, they have a stipend on top of that. So by the time they graduate with a career already ready for them. They're tops in the world. They can go right into the company and be fully salaried performers. They've seen more of the world by the time they're 20, 22 than most people will see over a lifetime. They've been on all the top world stages in the world, and they have zero debt, zero educational debt. And they just go right into the workforce. And some of them, not everybody stays and performs. Some become teachers, some move on to something else. And so what we do is their academic work is actually done during the summer. So we have a reverse, not we, but the students, I'm not a student, but the students have a reverse calendar where during tour, which is typically from around late December to early May, they have a little bit of, we call it study on tour that they do, some academic work in addition to their practical experience with the Performing Arts Company. And then they come back, we all have a break for a few weeks. And then the summer semester is their main academic load. And so they do that. Meanwhile, the choreographers and composers put together a whole new production, and we start rehearsing it. And then by the time fall comes around, we're deep into rehearsal season. We have 8 groups that perform around the world at the same time. So basically at our campus, which is a couple hours outside New York City, over in Orange County, New York, in the Hudson Valley, we have several different theaters. And on any given night, you have at least one, if not more, rehearsals, full dress rehearsals happening at the same time. My daughters will come watch, and they can see rehearsals 4 or 5 nights in a row. And then when the show is ready, which is usually around early to mid-December, then we start getting ready to hit the road. And then we have 8 companies going out all over the world. My group has been in the US this year. We only have a few weeks left of tour, but simultaneously we have a group in Paris. We have one in Taiwan. We have a couple in South America. We're just all over the place. We do about 800 shows between these 8 groups every year and perform in front of millions. And then we come back and get another show ready for next year. It's quite an endeavor.
Yeah, it sounds very organized too. So are these individuals, is it open to anyone or just Chinese people?
No, we have quite a few non-Chinese people. So the majority of the dancers are going to be ethnic Chinese, just by, I think, interest and how this comes about. But we have non-Chinese who, really have taken an interest to classical Chinese dance. My daughters, for example, I'm not Chinese. My wife is not Chinese, but my daughters love this, and they dream about being a classical Chinese dancer someday. They take it a little bit, and they're still young, so we'll see what happens. But that's one of the things that they want to do. And we have some who basically they get interested in the culture and the art form, which is, it's a whole other system from ballet, but it's as rigorous. So ballet's got their own kind of lines and movements and techniques. Classical Chinese dance is closer to, let's say, Chinese martial arts in terms of its heritage, how it came about. And the Chinese language is really interesting that way. The word for martial arts, you might have heard of wushu. People usually use kung fu, but also wushu is another name. The wu in wushu is the same sound as the wu in wudao, which is dance. So the same word can mean dance or martial arts, depending on how you use it. It's the same with the art form. The same movement that could be used to dodge a spear in battle becomes a backflip in classical Chinese dance. And so it's very different that way. It's deeply steeped and immersed in Chinese history and heritage. And so people are really drawn to that, and the legend and the stories behind them are drawn to the performing arts form. I would say in our orchestra, we have a larger contingent of non-Chinese. They come from all over the world. You know, in my group, we have one from Venezuela, and we have a Korean and a Japanese and a German, and from all over the world. And so, yeah, it's open to anybody. It's an interesting career path. It's a very different way of seeing the world and interacting with people. You know, on stage, you're not meeting people as much, but when the curtain comes up and you see people's reactions and the smiles and the tears and the joy, and you get so much love back during the curtain call from the audience. And sometimes you'll bump into somebody at a gas station or an elevator, and they tell you how much the show meant to them. You see the reviews. It's really an inspiring career. It's not for everybody. Certainly, it is something that requires a lot of dedication and commitment and sacrifice too. The travel, like you would with if you're playing baseball, you'd be away from your family for several months a year. That's just the reality, and that's something that you, as a family, you decide to do. And but it is deeply fulfilling, and because it has this feeling of, on the one hand, this is something that's so important for the people of China to give voice to those people who have no voice, who are in a labor camp being tortured, and to give voice to the thousands of years of civilization that was brought by the Communist Party to the brink of extinction. And here, that little bit of a flame is being rekindled, and this huge roaring fire of revival that is now all over the world. But also for all of us, for myself, people that I know, just things can get pretty dark sometimes these days, and to have a couple of hours where you have something so inspiring that brings you hope and leaves you with it afterwards. It's not just you see a movie, oh, that was fun, and you have dinner and that's it. You wake up next morning, it's gone. This is something that stays with you as an inspiration that people come back to again and again and share with other people. And you see everybody from fashion designers to movie producers talking about getting inspiration for their next project through Shen Yun. And people from different faiths talking about how it helped them connect with their own faith. It's something that we find very, very meaningful for people. And so it's really a joy to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Gives you, like you say, even being around all of that and seeing and the audiences and getting to talk to people from different parts of the world. It is a positive influence on the culture. So you mentioned concentration camps. Does that still go on?
So a few years ago, the Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping abolished the labor camps. But we tend to think that, and human rights organizations have documented this, that this is more symbolic than anything. This idea that you had labor camps in China. So the way somebody used to get sent to a labor camp in China was through it was administratively, it was not through trial. You could get picked up on the street for, let's say, handing out a flyer, a leaflet, certainly for having an unapproved copy of the Bible or any other religious text. And you could be sent just immediately to labor camp for up to 3 years without seeing a day in court, with nothing. And in the labor camp, you're working up to 20 hours a day. You're digging ditches. You're making products that make their way back here to America. There are testimonies of people who escaped the labor camps and then would go to McDonald's, get a Happy Meal, and say, "Oh, I made this exact thing when I was in a labor camp."
Wow.
So that's in our supply chain. We don't know how much of that, the cheap stuff, is actually made by free slave labor.
Mm.
So the labor camps themselves have been abolished, but what we're seeing is an uptick of people getting sent to prisons instead through trials that are very much show trials. And they have brainwashing. They call them re-education centers, which is just something straight out of 1984, where people can get picked up from their work. The boss might turn them in for having incorrect thoughts, and they get sent to a brainwashing class. And these are often in a factory or in some elementary school, and they're locked up in there. They're beaten, they're tortured, they're sat in front of TV monitors where they watch propaganda films over and over and over again. And like you mentioned, they also use family against each other. They'll bring in their family to cry and kneel in front of them and beg them to come home. If you just sign this paper disavowing your faith, just sign this paper admitting that you're wrong, you can come home. And we have a dance about that. The same dance I mentioned earlier is about this man who is arrested for his faith, and he is given a statement asking him to denounce it. And if he refuses to sign, he is going to face very dire consequences. And that's the choice that people face. And it's often between, they're putting you in these impossible situations between your loyalty to your God or your faith system and your loyalty to your husband, wife, and children. And it's a horrible position to put people in.
It is.
Yeah.
That is horrifying. And when you said re-education camps, that's really not a joke. I heard a lot about people saying that during in 2021 and 2022, and it kind of fizzled out. But for people who didn't want an mRNA injection, and they were, called all kinds of names, which is fine. Go ahead. But when you are threatened with some sort of re-education camp, that does get very dystopian, very scary. And to hear that from people in the United States, and I've seen clips where Hillary Clinton has suggested that people that are conservative and want the values of Christian values and want this country to continue focus, I guess, being based on our founding documents of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, that goes against everything that she believes, pretty much. So they should be sent to re-education camps. And that literally came out of her mouth and others. And in the medical industry, I want to say industrial complex, but that is not, it wasn't too far off. That's all I can say. I feel like we have a small window of reprieve, and hopefully we can wake enough people up so that doesn't happen again.
I think there's a big pushback against that nationwide and worldwide too. I think a key element for me personally, my understanding of all this, and one thing that traditional culture teaches us, if you look at ancient civilizations and the wisdom that they had, is having a little bit more humility about what we think is right. And even if you're really, really convinced that this is the vaccine and that this is the policy, just having that humility, you know what, there's a good chance I'm wrong. And I can't just go and force everybody and just bludgeon them over the head to make them do what I think is right, because I might be wrong. And we saw this during what we're calling COVID, with people getting deplatformed for questioning policies that now we know are wrong, that were detrimental. And now they're saying, oh yeah, you were right. Well, now you're saying you were right. You canceled me back in the day. You ruined my life. You broke up my
some people died because, Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, no, this is just we could rant about this for a while, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that there's a certain need for a humility to say, we may not know everything. Certainly, if you're a person of faith, you realize we don't know everything. We know a tiny fraction of what there is to know. And so let's treat each other with a little bit more respect and dignity, and be okay with people having different opinions. Politically or spiritually or whatever they may be, and that's okay to not agree with everybody, but respecting each other's dignity. And the Communist Party in China and beyond is not okay with that. You have to agree with it, and they're playing the long game to try to get us to agree with them, and that is ultimately what they want. They want control of people's hearts and minds. This is not Hitler's Nazism. They're not about killing the body. It's about killing the thoughts, killing the minds and hearts of people, and getting them to align with the Chinese Communist Party. They could have just gone and just massacred all these people in labor camps and be done with it. But instead, they put them through brainwashing sessions. They try to get them to sign things and then try to get them to, they call it transform other people. That is what they're about, because they ultimately want control of everything.
That's demoralizing people. Okay, on another note, before we have to end, there a couple of years ago that the people in power at the time wanted, or they allowed the Chinese Communist Party to set up a police station in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me how that worked and what were they looking for?
Yeah, we still don't know the full extent. I read somewhere there were more than 140 of them that were discovered. So there's a few different things that the Chinese Communist Party does. And used the word tentacles earlier. I think that's very true. If you've ever seen how an octopus can reach around corners and do all these crazy things, that's how the Chinese Communist Party operates. So one of the things that they try to do is silence any form of, they call it dissent, but it's really any form of other opinion that is not aligned with the Chinese Communist Party's ideology. And that might be somebody on the corner saying, hey, look at what's happening to House Christians in China. Look at what's happening to Falun Gong. Look at what's happening to Taiwan or to Tibet. Or, hey, how about we have democracy? Let's talk about democracy in China. Or it could be just people who are just vocal about, you know what, we don't like this current leader in China. And we don't like Xi Jinping. That is not okay for the CCP. And so what they do is they have various mechanisms in place to try to shut this down. A typical example would be the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations that they have in most big universities around the country. And these are organizations that are affiliated with the Chinese embassies and consulates. They answer directly to them and get directives from them. They're the ones who organize these welcome demonstrations. And whenever a CCP leader comes and they wave the Chinese flags, the PRC flags, I should say, and they block out protesters so that the CCP leader doesn't see them, and they get paid to do it, often $50 a day.
They did that in San Francisco, right?
Yeah. After the streets were completely cleaned. So that's one organization. The Confucius Institutes that are now, thankfully, a lot of them are being shut down. We know that was a soft power and ability to control what is being taught about Chinese history to people like myself who are interested in Chinese history and politics and religion and studying that, to control that, to say, no, there was no massacre related to Tiananmen Square. There's no persecution of Falun Gong. We treat Christians very well. You have complete religious freedom in China. That's the kind of stuff that they teach in those books. And how great Mao was. This is a person who killed 60 to 80 million people, more than anybody else in human history that we're aware of. So this is the kind of stuff that they do. So getting back to the police stations, one of the things that they do is this thing called a fox hunt, which is them trying through operatives, through CCP agents. And we actually know of two of them who were arrested trying to undermine my organization, Shen Yun Performing Arts, by trying to revoke our nonprofit status, trying to bribe an undercover agent who was pretending to be with the IRS to try to do that. And it was a sting operation, so they were caught. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But one of the things they try to do is they try to get these Chinese people, ethnic Chinese living in America. And even if you're an American citizen, maybe if they're first generation, they still have family back in China. And they come to these people and they say to them, listen, we know what you're up to. We know you went to this protest. We know you've been supporting this or that organization. You have some family back in China. You want anything bad to happen to them, would you?
Wow.
Okay, so come back with us and you better fly back to China either on your own or we're going to make you. And they actually have expatriated, in a way, people who have been living here in the United States back to China to try to silence them overseas and to try to control the narrative about China. And so the police stations were involved in stuff like that. They threaten people that they're going to kidnap them in the consulates and embassies, because once you step into a consulate, let's say to renew your passport, you're technically in China, even though you may be in San Francisco or in LA. And we've had stories of people getting beaten up in these embassies and consulates around the world. And then if you're not okay with that, you're going to get blacklisted. Like our performers in Shen Yun, who are Chinese, are blacklisted in China. Nobody can go back to China. In fact, if one of them went back to China, we would probably assume that they have been co-opted in some way if they were able to go there and come back, because they know who we are. They monitor all of us. And just, one of my partners on stage, when I was going on stage and emceeing with a woman, her father was ill and she couldn't go back to see him one last time because her passport had been confiscated by the embassy. And that's the kind of thing, it's not going to make headlines, but is the reality of people who make this choice to stand up for what they believe is right and not be co-opted. Yeah, so the police stations are a part of that, and there's many other things that we still don't know that are going on. But just from my experience in this one narrow lens of being with Shen Yun and seeing what they've done, we've had tires slashed on our buses in such a way that they wouldn't deflate right away, but it would explode at high speeds on the highway. That's attempted murder. That's happened multiple times on 2 different buses and our trucks. We've had our websites cyber hacked and attacked in different ways. We've had death threats, bomb threats, mass shooting threats, houses broken into. This is here in the US by people who are working for the CCP.
Wow.
It's a very big problem.
They won't leave you alone, and they chase you here, and you don't hear about this on the mainstream media. I think that speaks volumes that they don't even talk about this. Yeah. I get the Epoch Times, so I hear about what's going on.
Right. Yeah, they will report on it, but the New York Times will not. The New York Times is happy to write criticisms of groups that the CCP is opposed to, like Shen Yun, but the 50 or so bomb threats that we've received, there's nothing about that at all in the New York Times.
So, yeah. Yep, let that be a lesson to everyone out there listening. If you're still wasting your money on anything other than the Epoch Times, wow, I don't know what to say. Wow, we've run out of time, and I just could sit here and talk a lot just with you just to learn more. But I really appreciate you coming on the show and spending the time with us. And
it's been a pleasure. I could talk to you for a long time as well. Maybe we should have, let's see if we can offline arrange this. I can arrange for you to come see the show. And I'd love to get your thoughts about the performance and what you liked and what that made you feel or think. And we can chat about that afterwards.
That would be awesome. I have wanted to go for years now, and it's one of those things. You have to fit it in. It has to be right for everyone's schedule. Yep. And it's never where I am. I would have to drive. We'd have to go somewhere and spend the night in another town. And so
people do that, though. People do that.
Yes,
they'll drive for hours sometimes just to see a show. In fact, you mentioned, I think we mentioned Taiwan earlier. So Taiwan, of course, and this is a whole thing that we don't have time for now, but it's maintained its freedom in many ways. And so we perform in Taiwan, which is just 100 miles away from China, from mainland China. And our shows there are sold out, and the Chinese people can afford to. We'll fly out to Taiwan just to see the show.
Wow. Yes, I want to go. Anyway, thank you, Leeshai. I really appreciate your time and all this information. And it's just wrong. What's happening is just wrong. But as Christians, we can stand up, those who watch the show and start speaking up and raise awareness that people are being abused like this. And we can't let it come here. We cannot let it come to the United States of America.
Yeah. Thank you so much.